In the dream, I was reading a story about a young writing prospect who was writing a story. His story was a simple one, a mystery of the old-fashioned kind, a crime, a detective, a sidekick, some traveling around in an unknown country, a wise old priest, a solution. When he was finished, it was barely long enough, but was long enough to be a novel. So he set about finding a publisher, but first he showed it to his friend. The friend explained to him all the faults and suggested ways of correcting them. First of all, the novel, if it was a novel, was badly proportioned. The opening and entrainment of the narrative took too long, the denouement and proffered solution came too soon, and were presented too hastily. It felt more like a collapse than a completion. The book had the wrong shape, so it has to be longer. But above all, this novel lacked intellectual and aesthetic significance. Even in a detective story, he said, we want more than plot. We want the sense that what we're reading is important. Give us this sense. So the young writer hearkened to his friend and took back the manuscript and set to work. He darkened his story, deepened the characters, brooded on the landscape, discovered wiser things for the wise old priest to talk about. He found things that actually did seem pretty interesting, about architecture and its effect on churchgoers, about what happens to the soul when people look at trees in autumn, that sort of thing. The young writer was happy. He liked this repacking and embroidering, and soon the novel was twice as long. He showed it to his friend. The friend was satisfied and said, this is a really good piece of work you've done. It wasn't long before a publisher took an interest and gave the young writer a decent contract. Soon enough the book was published. The usual trade reviews like Kirkus and Publishers Weekly were raves. The book found itself in the windows of fashionable bookshops and had 2 stacks of itself on a prominent table at every Barnes & Noble. Sales were impressive, though not remarkable. The young writer walked about in a swoon of delight. Then the real review came. Big as his ambitions, serious as his novel, was it in the New York Review of Books or a monthly? In any case, the review savaged the book. It told the writer what perhaps he suspected all along. The plot was compact and intelligible, the characters plausible, the local color set pieces effective. It was, the reviewer said, a very clever piece of work. It had muscles, good bones, fair reach, but it had no heart. No heart at all, just clever workshop stuff. A do-it-yourself project with no soul. So the young writer went home and shot himself. In the head or the arm or the belly, but not in the heart. He had learned that he had no heart to aim at. Later that day, an indifferent world received the news of his, by now, predictable decease. At this point in the dream, I became aware that the last sentence I had just read was a variation or parody of the famous last sentence of Thomas Mann's The Death in Venice, about the shocked and respectful world receiving the news of Aschenbach's death. I realized that there was more to this sad little story I had been reading in my dream than I thought at first. I began to become aware that the story I was reading actually came from a collection of linked tales, a whole book of them called Kafka's Brother, and that the friend spoken of in the story, who gets the boy to spoil his work with false ambitions, is actually the Kafka's brother of the title, the unknown accompanist who guides many generations of young writers unerringly towards illusory public success and profound personal despair. It is Kafka's brother who whispers big plans, who guides the writer's hands towards plausible solutions and away from the structures of thought and poetry. So it is to escape Kafka's brother that some writers on their deathbeds cry out, as Kafka did, Max, burn all my work. Thank you.